to the channel where today we are going to be doing our San Francisco 49ers team preview for the 2026-2027 season. And without further ado, let's get into this Niners preview. Starting off with the coaching staff, this will probably be one of the quicker coaching staff segments. Most of the coaching staff segments as we get to better teams are going to be quicker because there's not really much to talk about with these coaches, starting off with Kyle Shanahan once again being the Niners head coach for the 10th straight year, as well as the play caller for the 10th straight year. We all know that Shanahan's one of the better minds, offensive minds in the league, one of the better coaches in the league, two Super Bowl appearances, lots of overall team success, like just lots of winning, multiple playoff wins as well, even when they don't get to the Super Bowl. He rarely doesn't have a top 10 offense throughout his entire career as the Niners head coach. And there's, again, just not much to really talk about when it comes to Kyle Shanahan. We all know how good he is. Maybe you can question some of the late game stuff when it comes to playoffs, and maybe they should have more playoff success with all the talent they have on their team and the talent they've had throughout the years. But they've also been constantly injured throughout the last, like, what, 5, 6 years. So it's kind of difficult to put a lot on the responsibility of that on Shanahan. And we all know that Shanahan's one of the better coaches in the league. And because of that, you don't really have to worry about who your OC is. Right now, it's Clay Kubiak entering his second year as the offensive coordinator for the Niners. He worked with the Niners for 4 years prior in different roles. He's the son of Gary Kubiak, the brother of new Raiders head coach Clint Kubiak. And as I said, you don't really need to worry too much about the offensive coordinator because Kyle Shanahan's your coach. He's going to do all the heavy lifting when it comes to the offense and the offensive play calling. That you're kind of just bringing in Kubiak as a guy to be the sort of assistant to Shanahan and maybe get his own head coach job, like you see all these big coaches, these offensive minded coaches grow out their coaching tree across the NFL. And maybe Clay Kubiak, with also the lineage of Gary and Clint, can maybe get his own head coach job in the future, but we probably won't see much from him or have much of a role from him in this season. And then finally, the new piece of this team, of this coaching staff, is Raheem Morris. He was the Falcons head coach in 2020. Then he was the Rams head coach from 2021 to 2023. Then he went back to being the Falcons head coach from 2024 to 2025. The Falcons defense, in my opinion, played okay under Raheem Morris. They definitely had a much better season this most recent season, considering all the youth they had on their team. Now, I guess Raheem Morris got fired halfway through the season, I'm pretty sure, toward the end of the season, but they had a good defense last year. That at one point, I'm pretty sure they were like the number one defense in the league or number one total defense or passing defense, some big metric they were number one in at one point in the NFL. So I have confidence that Raheem Morris can be a good defensive coach. He's coached some overall solid defenses before, even not including that Falcons year. And I also trust the Niners head coach hiring, defensive coordinator hiring, right? They've had many hits with guys like D'Amico Ryans and Robert Saleh that I really just trust the vision that the Niners have when it comes to hiring DCs. And maybe Raheem Morris can take a year off from being a head coach. He did that when he went to the Rams. And maybe this time off being the Niners DC can help him get a new head coaching job in the future. Or maybe he's just one of those guys that isn't meant to be a head coach and just meant to be a defensive coordinator as the main defensive play caller. We'll have to wait and see what we get out of Raheem Morris in this Niners defense, if this Niners defense can once again stay healthy with also some of the more younger, unproven pieces, especially on the secondary. But I like the Raheem Morris hire. And overall, you got one of the best coaches in the league. You have a very experienced and quality DC. So it should be a good coaching staff for this Niners team once again. All right, now we can start talking about this Niners defense. And as usual, start off with the offseason changes that the Niners made. First, at the receiver position, a lot of turnover at the wide receiver position for the Niners. They lose Jawan Jennings, they lose Kendrick Bourne, and they bring in Mike Evans, Debo Samuel, Deshaun Stribling, and Christian Kirk. Jawan Jennings was a nice, reliable option for them, had a decent season with just under 700 yards, 9 touchdowns, really stepped up when you saw guys like Pearsall get injured, when other receivers and this whole Niners team got hurt. Jawan Jennings stepped up and played pretty well. Kendrick Bourne had his two really good, like 140 plus yard games early last season when Mac Jones was at quarterback. They had their little Patriots chemistry there. But once Brock Purdy came back, once the receivers got a little healthier, Kendrick Bourne kind of fell out of the offense. So not really a horrible loss there. And then in terms of the additions, you bring in Mike Evans, who only played 8 games last year because of a collarbone injury and wasn't the best when he did play, but part of that could be because he was coming back from an injury. He's obviously on the older side. We'll see if he can be healthy, but we all know how good Mike Evans can be. and maybe you don't get the best version of Mike Evans this year, I still think it's an improvement on their overall receiver room, especially with the Ricky Pearsall injury. You got Debo Samuel returning back to the Niners. How much of an impact will he make? He actually was pretty solid last year on the Commanders in a forgotten season for Washington and maybe even Debo, but he was pretty solid last year. So I think he can actually find a role here in San Francisco, especially with the history and the familiarity with Shanahan and this offense. Deshaun Stribling, their what is it? Their second round pick out of Ole Miss. I didn't mind the pick, but has had a good preseason so far. So I think he can really fill that Jawan Jennings role. And then Christian Kirk has always been a decent depth guy at best. So I think not only did they get deeper at receiver, bringing in four guys compared to the two they lost, and I think these four can all make a decent or better impact, but I do think they got better overall at the receiver room. And then their only other big notable change is switching guards from Spencer Buford to Robert Jones. Spencer Buford, he's a fine player, solid run blocker, still has some potential at 26 years old, only played 11 games for them. And then Robert Jones, he missed all of last year, so he's coming off a big injury and he's okay. Not the best, but not terrible, just all right at best. So I do think they got worse at the guard position, but Robert Jones isn't necessarily penciled in as a starter. They have like three guys maybe that could take that guard spot. So we'll talk about that when discussing the whole offensive line. But if you just look at Buford to Jones, I think that's a downgrade compared just to those two players. So overall, they did get better on offense, adding all the good receiver depth that they did add. And if they're healthy, if Brock Purdy, McCaffrey, and Kittle and all these guys are healthy, it doesn't really matter. They're a really good team anyway. And we can talk about this offense now more in depth. And we'll start off with Brock Purdy at quarterback. Last year was just another good quality year for Purdy, right? The thing about Purdy is not he never has like the biggest arm, but for the most part, he'll make the right throws when he needs to be. He was really good as a rusher last year, probably his best year as a scrambler. We all know that he's really good at buying time, avoiding sacks, right? I have some numbers here. He was first in pressure to sack rate percentage. So the amount of pressures he got, he was able to avoid sacks the highest. He was also fifth in average time to throw. So he really can buy time in the pocket. Very sneaky athletic. He doesn't come across as a guy who's going to be super athletic, especially considering maybe he doesn't have the biggest arm, but he can really move around the pocket. Maybe we'll throw some questionable interceptions, right? Did have 10 interceptions to only 20 touchdowns in 9 games last year, which was nearly the same as last year with the 16 games he played. So he will put the ball in danger at times, but overall he is good at keeping the ball out of harm's way for the most part. And he's a good quarterback, right? Maybe he's not one of the top tier quarterbacks, but for a guy that was picked dead last in the draft, he's really turned out to be a very quality top 15-ish quarterback. He can potentially jump into that top 10 range if he can really turn down the interceptions, because his best season when he had like 30 plus touchdowns, he still had like double digit picks. I'm pretty sure maybe like 9 interceptions. So if he can really cut down the picks, get back to some more touchdowns, if he can, obviously play more games, he probably would have gotten more than 20. He can maybe get himself closer to that top 10 tier, in my opinion. I think he's on the outside of that tier in that 11 to 15 range. But he's a good quarterback. I think you can win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy. I mean, they've gone to a Super Bowl once already with him and almost beat the Chiefs. So I think he's a good quarterback. Is he a great quarterback? Maybe not, but I do think he is a good quality, very more than serviceable quarterback. It's just, can we get more out of Purdy, or has he sort of peaked at this version that he currently is at? Let me go to the running back room. You got Christian McCaffrey, who obviously had an incredible season last year, 1,200 rushing yards, almost 1,000 receiving yards, almost had another 1,000 year, had 9 touchdowns in the air, 10 in the ground. And yes, he's regressed as a runner because he's 30 years old, his injury history, the workload he's had throughout his career, but he's still the second or best receiving back in the league. He still can break tackles. He can still force missed tackles. And yes, he only averaged, not even 4 yards a carry. He's still one of the better weapons in football. Maybe he's not one of the better running backs, like true running backs in the league, but he's still an elite weapon. And if you can get a fully healthy McCaffrey, which I know is never a guarantee with Christian McCaffrey, but if you can get a fully healthy McCaffrey, once again, like you got last year, he can be one of the better just overall playmakers in the league, even if he's not the same runner. When you combine his rushing and receiving ability, you all know how good he can be. It's just, will he not avoid serious regression? Because he's regressed a little bit, but if he cannot avoid a significant regression, stay fully healthy, it should be another amazing season for Christian McCaffrey. Then you got some decent backups, not really though. Some interesting backups, I guess is a better way to put it. Jordan James didn't really play much at all his rookie year. He only had 3 games, but former fifth round picks. We'll see what he can give them. You got Kalen Black, their third rounder out of Indiana, had 1,000 yards on the national championship Indiana team. He's got good size. He can break tackles, always fights for extra yards, even if he's not the fastest or most explosive or elusive. He's a very tough physical runner. So not a bad pick there in the third round. You do need some good depth behind McCaffrey because you never know if McCaffrey's going to be healthy for you. So I did like it better when they had maybe a Brian Robinson or when they had a Jordan Mason compared to the Jordan James Kalen Black combo. We'll see two unproven guys, right? A combined 3 games played in the NFL amongst these two, and neither one of them has gotten a carry in the NFL so far. So very unproven backfield duo, but we'll see what happens there. You also got Kyle Juszczyk at fullback, still one of the better fullbacks in the league, still probably the best fullback in the league, and still a very useful player. Despite the fullback position being almost extinct now in the NFL, you still find Kyle Juszczyk being a very useful and very quality fullback. And then we can go to the pass catchers. It's going to be a quicker video, I feel like, because a lot of the Niners players, we all know how good they are. There's not much to really talk about the Niners. It's just the biggest question with the Niners is can they still stay healthy? And if they stay healthy, we know they have the talent to be a 12 plus win team that can contend for winning the NFC and all that type of stuff. And now we'll go to the weapons, where I guess there's a little bit more discourse, if you want to say. We'll start off with Mike Evans, their big free agency acquisition. We mentioned before, only played 8 games with the collarbone injury. He also missed another portion of the season, I'm pretty sure. Had 403 in the 8 games he played. He did have one of those classic Mike Evans games where he had 130 yards and 6 catches against the Falcons on Thursday night. But overall, was not the same Mike Evans in all the other games. As I also said before, probably because the injury that he was coming back from, the Bucks offense in the second half of the season when Mike Evans came back wasn't the same as they were in the beginning of the season. It hasn't been the healthiest training camp for Mike Evans, which isn't the greatest sign. He is 33 years old. He signed with the 49ers, which when you go to the 49ers, you just seem to get injured. That's just how it goes. The substation that they practice next to seems to play a big part of that. But again, just last year, he had 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. He can still be an impact in an offense, even if he's not the same Mike Evans he once was. It's just, you just are concerned with his injury status and with his health going forward, especially after signing a 3-year, $42 million contract this offseason, which did seem like a lot, not the money wise, but the length of the contract seemed like a lot for a guy like Mike Evans. But hopefully he can stay healthy because he can still be a good player on this team, especially when they have some intriguing pieces around him. First, Debo Samuel, as I said before, actually did not have a bad year with the Commanders. No one really talked about it because no one really talked about the Commanders season as a whole, and because Debo wasn't Debo, right? But he still had 800 yards, 800 total yards, 6 total touchdowns in a very inconsistent Commanders offense and a very somewhat run heavy Commanders offense. Right, they had all those running backs. Marcus Mariota was running the ball. So for Debo to have a decent year at 30 years old, in a new offense, with people kind of thinking he's fallen off. It was a pretty good year for Debo. Now he gets to reunite with San Francisco, reunite with Shanahan. He knows the team, he knows the system, he knows everything, right? The team hasn't really changed outside of Mike Evans coming in, I guess, for Brandon Ayuk. The team is basically the same when Debo left. So he has a ton of familiarity with this team. And I do think Debo can find a nice impact as as well as Mike Evans if both can stay healthy. And then Deshaun Stribling, their second round pick out of Ole Miss, a nice long striding vertical threat. He can be a slot. He can be a more Z receiver. Right now, the depth chart that I'm using has him as the starting slot, but I feel like you can move him around. He's got good strength after the catch. And I think he can very well be that new Jawan Jennings, that bigger body, reliable third down chain mover option, great run blocker as well. He's had 11 catches for 100 yards in his first 2 preseason games combined, and overall has looked good in the preseason so far. So I like his pairing with a guy like Mike Evans and Debo. Mike Evans being that vertical threat that you can just throw the ball to. Debo kind of doing all the gadget stuff, the after catch, and then Stribling being your sort of middle of the field safety blanket, chain moving type of guy there at receiver. And then their fourth receiver that they added, Christian Kirk, not a bad fourth best receiver, fifth best receiver. He had 240 and a touchdown in the 13 games he played for Houston. He's been a 1,000 yard, eight touchdown guy before. Now, granted, that was like 4 years ago, but there's still something in there. He did have that really good playoff game against Pittsburgh where he had 144 yards and a touchdown. Doesn't have that bad of drop issues either. I don't think it's a bad signing as a fourth best receiver. Now, you might need a bigger role out of him considering Mike Evans and Debo and all these other guys potentially could deal with injuries. So you might need a bigger role of Christian Kirk than the fourth to fifth best receiver. But if he's allowed to play that fourth, fifth receiver role, I don't mind him in that role. And then you also got Demarcus Robinson, who, I mean, not horrible depth, not great depth either. He has familiarity being the second year in San Francisco, had 270 and one last year, did have 507 the year before on the Rams in three more games. So maybe if he plays more with an extra year in the offense and the system, maybe he can get more around that 500, 405 touchdown type of season, which wouldn't be bad as, again, that fourth, fifth best receiver. Lastly, you have Jordan Watkins, not really much action in his rookie year. Had three targets, did catch them all for 26 yards, so 100% catch rate for Jordan Watkins. And then also, he's not listed on the depth chart because he's out for the season, but Ricky Pearsall, we won't see him again this year. He took a solid jump from year one to year two, had no touchdowns in his second season, but had more yards per game, still continues to show those elite hands he had. And while he only played 9 games his last year and 11 his rookie year, he had two 100-yard games in his second season and almost a third. He was like 94 or something. And that is compared to just the one 100-yard game he had his rookie season. So I still think there is something there with Ricky Pearsall if he can just stay healthy, which is a big ask for Ricky Pearsall, but he gets to take this year off. Mike Evans can come in, Debo can come in as veteran guys, and then maybe down the line you have Stribling and you have Pearsall being your two main players because Pearsall can be that deep threat that can make those crazy catches deep down the field, and Stribling can be that more intermediate, sometimes vertical threat chain mover, as we mentioned before. So I don't mind those two going forward if we can get more healthy seasons out of Pearsall. But for this season, it's just the veterans and Stribling, essentially. And I don't think it's a bad little trio or 4, 5 man receiver room here if you can get these guys healthy. But that, again, is a big if. And then we can go to the tight end room to talk about some more pass catchers for this Niners offense. And you don't really need to talk about George Kittle much, one of those players that's on this team that's really good, that enough has already been said when it comes to George Kittle. It looks like he'll be back week one, which I guess is the big thing with Kittle, is when he'll be back and excuse me, and how he'll look after his Achilles injury that he had, I believe, in January. But when he's on the field, he's still one of the best tight ends in the league, if not the best, arguably the best run blocking tight end, still an elite receiving tight end as well. He had almost 650 yards and seven touchdowns in just 11 games, which is basically, if he played all games, he could have easily gotten 1,010, to be honest. He has shown no regression in terms of actual ability, despite being over 30 years old. He just needs to be on the field. If he's on the field, he's elite, and that's pretty much it. But if he's not on the field, you have Jake Tonjes, who is probably one of the better. I don't know if he's one of the better, but a very quality tight end too. Jake Tonjes had almost 300 yards and five touchdowns last year, only one drop, and overall is just a nice, reliable backup that could be honestly a near starter on some teams in the NFL. But he's behind the best tight end in football. But if Kittle misses a game here and there, plug it in. Jake Tonjes as your starting tight end. Tight end is not bad at all. And then we'll finally discuss the offensive line real quick. It's a really good offensive line, right? You have Trent Williams, who still was one of the best linemen in the league. He was all pro second team last year, pro bowler last year, still one of the better run blockers in the league, can also pass block very well. And despite being 38 years old, there's no reason to expect any major regression with Trent Williams. Until he shows it, I'm not expecting it. And he might retire before we see any major regression out of Trent Williams. He's elite. And then you got Colton McKivitz, your other tackle, who Trent Williams, being one of the best run blockers in all of football, could make you forget that Colton McKivitz is also a really good run blocker as well. Also can pass block too. And he's been very consistent and a good tackle for like 3 years now. So you're set at your two tackle spots here. No need to worry about them at all. Then we'll go to the center spot. Jake Brendel going all over the place here. Brendel's just another quality lineman for San Francisco. Good run blocker, capable in the pass. Not great, but very capable in pass block. Not a bad starting center by any mean. And it's just a quality, nice veteran at 33, about to be 34 years old. Not mad at Brendel being your starting center. Then you got probably your third best lineman. It goes Trent McKivitz, then probably Dominic Pooney. A nice jump from year one to year two for Pooney. He's a nice, versatile guard. He can run, he can pass block well in both areas. Only allowed one sack last year, and I still think he can get better going from year two to year three, and even moving on. And now it gets a little dicey with this Niners sort of left guard spot. Right now, this website, R Lads, is the website I use for these. They have Robert Jones, their free agent pickup at guard. You also got Carver Willis, their fourth round pick. You have Brett Toth, who they picked up from Philly, who might be the best of these three, and maybe even Colby Connor, your backup right guard, could also be there could also play some left guard for this team. We'll start off with Robert Jones. I mentioned him briefly in the offseason additions, missed all of last year in 2024 with Miami. He wasn't bad. He wasn't great. He's overall just all right. Only 27 years old, so maybe still room to get better, but it's just an whatever, all right, you know, option there at starting left guard. You got, we'll talk about Carver Willis, their fourth round pick out of Washington. Very good run blocker in college. Not really built for to be a really good pass blocker, but he could be a very nice depth piece in the run game. Then you got Brett Toth, as I said, might be the best of the three. Solid run blocker, not a horrible pass blocker by any means. He has experience playing on a very good Eagles offensive line. And then finally, Colby Connor, their seventh round pick from last year, wasn't a bad run blocker his rookie season. So a lot of interesting pieces, you could say, at that potential left guard spot with Robert Jones, Carver Willis, Brett Toth, and Colby Connor. So we'll kind of just wait and see who ends up taking that left guard spot. But outside of that, you have one of the best tackles in all of football, very good right tackle, a good ascending right guard, a quality starting center. So even though you have a rotational spot there at left guard, you got the pieces around it to still make the O line work. You have your good quarterback. You have your hopefully healthy, really good running back, hopefully healthy, elite tight end. You have some promise at the receiver position if they can stay healthy. And this Niners offense was around top 10 last year, maybe more towards, like that 11, 12, 13th range. They very well should push for another near top 10 offense again this season. Now to talk about this Niners defense, we'll start off with the edge room. The only real notable change here is the departure of Bryce Huff, who was a solid backup pass rusher he came off a very down year after getting that big contract from Philly. Gets, I think, traded to the Niners and doesn't have a bad season by any means. Could eventually get cut or traded again off San Francisco. Well, I guess he did because they lost him. I was thinking he was still on the team for whatever reason. But last year, solid backup, but not too notable of a change, especially if Nick Bosa is fully healthy. You won't really notice the departure of Bryce Huff too much. So I left that at neutral. Then at the D line, they move on from Jordan Elliott and Kalia Davis, and they bring in Osa Odigizua in the trade with the Cowboys. Elliott, not the most impactful last year. Same thing with Kalia Davis. And Osa Odigizua, who they get in a trade from Dallas. They traded a third for him. I really like Osa Odigizua. I think he has a lot of potential. I thought that was a great trade from San Francisco and a clear upgrade at that interior D line position. Then at linebacker, they move on from D Winters and they bring in Dre Greenlaw. Kind of similar with the Bryce Huff thing. If Dre Greenlaw is healthy, I think he's an upgrade over D Winters. But if he's injured, you're going to regret moving on from D Winters. D Winters was also traded for a fifth. They got a fifth round pick out of him. The third year was last year was his third year and his first as a full time starter. Was pretty solid in coverage. Not the best run defender, but he definitely has some upside overall. Only 25 years old. I think even if Dre Greenlaw's healthy, they could regret that trade. And then Dre Greenlaw comes back to San Francisco. Was actually pretty good for Denver when he did play. We all know the injury concerns with Dre Greenlaw. Just another player on this Niners team that has injury issues. But we know that when Dre Greenlaw is healthy, he can still be very good as a linebacker too for this team. So I do think they got better in the time being. On paper, they got better at linebacker, but it all really depends on Dre Greenlaw's health. And then at safety, they move on from Jason Pinnock. I left this pretty neutral. He was a decent to quality run defender last year for them, like he always is, but overall wasn't the best. Definitely not the best in coverage. So I think that was pretty neutral there. And then at corner, they bring in Jack Jones and Nate Hobbs. Now I know they didn't lose anybody at corner, but I also left this as a not really too notable of a change, as these are two backup corners that aren't the best cover guys, not the worst, can play good at times, but I don't think as backups that are just okay. I left that as a pretty not too noticeable change there at corner. So it's really just Osa Adigizua coming in the trade, and hopefully a healthy Dre Greenlaw is the only real changes for this Niners team, on top of other changes that just include guys getting healthy. And we'll start off with that interior D line, including one of those guys being Nick Bosa. We'll start off with edge rushers. Normally I start off with the interior of the D line, but because we mentioned players coming back just off injury, not necessarily added to the team, we can start off with Nick Bosa. Only played 3 games last year. And maybe he's not the same player he once was that'll give you 18 and a half sacks and win Defensive Player of the Year like he has before. However, when healthy, Nick Bosa is still one of the better edge rushers in the league. He can absolutely still get after the quarterback at an elite level. He can defend the run very well on top of it. And he's still really, really good. It's just, can he stay healthy? That's the biggest, question with Nick Bosa coming into this season, is how will he do coming off the injury? I think he'll be just fine because he's that good. But it's just I still got to see it. I still got to see him come back from the injury and still be one of the better edge rushers in the league. But I do fully expect him to do that. And if he does, not much to be said about how good Nick Bosa is when he's actually on the field. And then their other big edge rusher is Michael Williams, another question mark. Only played 9 games his rookie season. When he did play, wasn't that great for Michael Williams as the former 11th overall pick. So we definitely have a lot to see still out of Michael Williams being that first round pick. Because I think there was like mock drafts that were like, oh, the Niners should get an edge rusher because maybe they already gave up on Michael Williams. We'll see. A lot to prove there in year 2 for Michael Williams. Some of the bench guys, you got Keon White, not a horrible depth pass rusher, played 5 games with New England before going to San Francisco last year and playing 9 games. Had a solid year with New England in 2024, just didn't really follow it up in 2025, but there's still something there with Keon White. We've seen him play quality backup football before, so I think there's no reason we can't expect him to do that again this season, especially a full off season with the Niners, even if it's a different DC and a different system there, going from Saleh to Raheem Morris, it's still the team. And the players on the team are still very similar. So maybe a full season can help Keon White get back to that 2024 version of himself, which is a much more impactful player, even if it's not, a superstar starting edge rusher, still a lot more impactful than he was last season. Then you have, got to get this right, Sam Okawano. He's just another okay edge guy at best, a little bit maybe worse than a Keon White. He had the biggest role of his career last year. You saw some improvement going from, I think that was year 2 last year, maybe year 3 going into this season. He's a nice player. Still has some potential. We'll see though. But again, at his current state, he's just okay at best. But then you have a Romello Height, their third round pick out of Texas Tech, who I think is having a pretty good like off-season training camp, preseason, whatever. A super fast speed rusher, can quickly, in my opinion, become a very useful rotational guy, a nice explosive spark plug off the bench. Definitely needs to, get stronger, get bigger, but he has the tools, the physical tools to make a pretty instant impact, not a major impact, but instantly become an impactful rotational pass rusher with the ability to develop even further into a true number 1, number 2 starting pass rusher. But I really like the Romello Height pick there in the third round. Going to some of the interior guys, we'll go to Osa Adigizua, the trade that they made. Again, I really love this trade for the Niners. Only cost them, I think I said, a third round pick. I feel like Odigizua never really got full appreciation, especially last year because he was on the D line with Quinnen Williams for the second half of the season, Kenny Clark And as that third D lineman, I feel like he didn't get talked about enough. But when he's gotten a bigger role, we've seen him get bigger roles before. He can be a pretty disruptive pass rushing D lineman, only 27 years old. Now he gets to go to a very good team. I know Dallas's defense is improving, but this Niners defense really good. And I think he can have a pretty good season as this team's number one D lineman. He goes from finishing the season as maybe the third most important interior D lineman on Dallas to now being the team's clear number one D lineman in San Francisco. Then you have your two rookie, or not rookies, but second year players in Alfred Collins and CJ West. Alfred Collins in a backup D line role as a rookie wasn't the best for Alfred Collins as a near top 40 pick. I think he was like pick 41, 2, or 3, something along that lines. He was basically or nearly a top 40 pick. Showed some promise as a pass rusher, but now as a starter, a full-time starter here going into year two, we'll see what type of improvement we can get out of Alfred Collins. And you got CJ West, who is a pretty similar case for him as it was for Alfred Collins. Wasn't the best rookie season in a smaller role, showed some promise as a pass rusher, and we'll also now see what he can do at year two, now being the team's third best interior D line. And then you got Grace Halton, who is their fourth round pick this year. So they've made three top four round draft picks in the last 2 years at the interior D line position out of Oklahoma. He can become a very solid, maybe even at one point good pass rushing D lineman. I feel like at worst, he's a nice rotational, off the bench spark plug, freak athlete. So I didn't hate the Grayson Holton pick, especially at the fourth round, considering you have CJ West, who you took in the fourth last year, you have Alfred Collins, who you took in the last year as well. Those guys haven't established themselves yet. So throwing a guy like Grayson Hall in that mix, in that competition, I think maybe can even benefit a guy like CJ West and Alfred Collins because they're like, they drafted us somewhat high. At least Alfred Collins was drafted high, CJ West somewhat high. And after a rookie season, they're already investing in a Grayson Hall in the fourth round, in a Osa Adigazua basically in the third round because they traded a third round pick for him. I think that competition could potentially be beneficial for everyone, even Osa Adigazua. That's really all to talk about when it comes to this D line. If you get healthy Nick Bosa, if Osa Odigizua is as good as I think he can be, and if you see some progression from your young guys like Collins, Williams, and West, and maybe even Halton, it can be a really good D line. But right now, it's just Nick Bosa and Osa. It's Nick Bosa, elite, Osa Odigizua, really good, and then a lot of unproven commodities around those two. Then we can go to the linebacker position. Once again, a position group that has a player that has no real explanation needed to be made because it's Fred Warner, right? Fred Warner is clearly the best linebacker in football. He's been that for the last like 3, 4 years. Didn't play a ton last year, only 6 games, but when healthy, we know how good Fred Warner is, arguably the best linebacker in coverage, great in the run, all pro 3 straight years prior to last season when obviously he only played 6 games. One of the most athletic linebackers, makes some of the most insane plays, forces some of the most insane turnovers, one of the smarter linebackers in the league as well. Just an insane talent that Fred Warner is, and I'm glad he's back fully healthy. Hopefully, we get a fully healthy season of Fred Warner because we all know how good he is. And then they bring old friend Dre Greenlaw back after he took a stint with Denver for, I believe it was only one season. Dre Greenlaw's always injured, right? Speaking of this Niners team, it's a common theme that you notice. It's health. They're never healthy. However, in the 8 games he played for Denver, Dre Greenlaw, he was actually pretty good. He looked somewhat close to the Dre Greenlaw that was one of the best, if not the best, linebacker too just a few years ago. He was great in the run. He was good in coverage, had an interception, had a sack, 40 tackles, barely missed any tackles. And again, he just needs to stay healthy. And if he can stay healthy, him and Fred Warner, if they can both stay healthy, not that Fred Warner has injury concerns, he's just coming off of one. If they can both be healthy, they can still be one of the better linebacker duos in the league. I mean, it's pretty easy to be one of the better linebacker duos in the league when you have the clear best linebacker in football. But Dre Greenlaw can still, in my opinion, be a very, very good linebacker too, if he can just stay healthy. And then, so that's pretty much it for the linebackers. I mean, you have some depth there. You have You have Luke Gifford, who was a Pro Bowl special teamer last year, but as a linebacker, really wasn't that great. Not really good in run. I don't know. He's okay in run, not really good in coverage. And then you have Tatum Bethune, who honestly wasn't a bad year two for Bethune as he played more of a bigger role because of the Fred Warner injury, had almost 100 tackles, wasn't great in coverage, but was decent in the run and maybe can develop into a decent player as a former seventh round pick. It's really just Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. Like they really need Dre Greenlaw to be healthy. I think Tatum Bethune can hold down the fort if he has to play. If he has to be the second linebacker or one of the starting linebackers on this team for 3, 4 games because Greenlaw misses some time. But you definitely really hope that Dre Greenlaw can get a pretty much fully healthy season because the depth isn't looking great outside of him. And obviously, you know how good Fred Warner is. The biggest question of this Niners defense, though, is their secondary. It's a very young secondary, a lot of promise, especially going forward in the future, like some high upside guys. But in terms of what we're going to get from this season, a lot of question marks. We'll start off at corner with their clear best corner, Diamador Lenore, a young, promising corner, the probably the best on the team, as I said. Wasn't as good of a year last year as he's been the 2 years prior, the 2 years that got him that 5 year, $89 million contract, which he might not be worth it at this point. And that's what those 2 years got him, especially in terms of coverage. But he's still a solid cover corner, and he still can be an even better cover corner. Does need to still work on his run defense. But overall, he's not a bad number one corner. There's a lot better number one corners, but he's not a horrible number one corner. And he still is on the younger side. He still can get better. And he's been better before. So he's been better and he's still younger. So I still think he not only can get back to what he was that got him paid, but maybe even better than that. We just have to see it. Then you have Renardo Green, who I thought overall had a promising year two for Renardo, was better in coverage, still could improve, was better in run defense, but also still could improve as well. So overall, it wasn't a massive improvement going from year one to year two, but it was an improvement nonetheless. And I think he can take another step forward going from year two to year three. They definitely will need that out of Renardo Green, or going from year two to year three. Those are the guys there, the more solidified of the corners. But I really like Upton Stout as the third round pick last year. Loved what I saw from him. Showed a lot of flashes in that nickel spot. Gave up 0 touchdowns. Was very good in the run. Also a nice blitz threat. Had I think the most pressures of any corner. I was really impressed with Upton Stout in his rookie season. And you got the only guy behind him is Nate Hobbs. So it's Upton Stout's job here at this nickel spot for this Niners team. But he's coming into his second season. Lenore's still on the younger side. Renardo Green's on the younger side. So while it might not be the most solidified, locked down three corners on this team, there's still a lot of upside of these three guys. You just when are we going to get? Are we going to get this? Are we going to get it this season? Because if we get it this season, it could be a pretty good secondary. But if it's going to take them a year or two more to fully, reach their potential, it might not be the best year for this Niners corner room. You do have the two veterans they brought in that we talked about with Jack Jones and Nate Hobbs. I mean, Jack Jones, he's not the best cover guy really at all, but as a run defender and a blitzer, you can find some value in Jack Jones as a backup. I do think he's had a decent preseason from what I've seen. Nate Hobbs, another backup guy, perfect fit for San Francisco because he also can never stay healthy. But when he is healthy, he's just an okay backup. Also can defend the run somewhat well. Also can give you a little bit of a blitz threat and maybe even worse cover guy than Jack Jones. But when healthy, similar to Jack Jones, you can find some value in Nate Hobbs. The big if is when healthy. You do have your fourth round pick. I need to get how to pronounce it. Ephesians Brysock. I might have butchered that. I don't mind the Brysock pick as one of the, I think they said on one of the preseason games that he had the longest wingspan of any corner in the draft. But overall, just a big, long, lanky, athletic corner, physical, can tackle well in space, really puts that wingspan and that reach to use when it comes to tackling. Did lack a bit of ball production in college and maybe overall at his current self, which could maybe limit his upside. But I still think he can make an impact. as at fourth round pick, use that big frame to his advantage, find a lot of mismatches. So I didn't hate the pick. He had a nice pass deflection against Carnell Tate in the preseason. So there you go. You also got not real honestly, not really. It's really just those six guys at corner that I think will really make any impact for this Niners team. Then going on to the safety room, you have your two starters in Mustafa and Jair Brown. Mustafa only played 12 games in his second season, but also showed you a lot of flashes in both year one and year two. Wasn't as good in coverage compared to year one, even though he didn't really have a biggest sample size in both seasons. He has shown to be better in coverage before. He's a solid run defender. He can provide some blitzes as well, a blitz threat as well. I don't mind Mustafa, another younger player of the secondary that still could get better. Same thing with Jair Brown. Once again, following the trend of young players on the secondary that have shown some moments, but still need to put it all together and very well can. I think Renardo Green and Lenore and Stout and Mustafa and Jair Brown can get better, can maybe fully put it together. Lenore the least of them all because he's the oldest and maybe the less upside. He just really has to get back to the version that he played before this season, and that's the jump you're looking for. Well, these other guys haven't proven to be better; they just have to get better, which I think again that they can. But going back to Jair Brown, he was decent in both coverage and run defense last year and overall in his career, with room to grow, which, as I said before, I think he can do that. The depth outside of that isn't the best. You got Marcus Siegel, didn't have the best rookie season when he played. He didn't play a lot, but it wasn't the best when he played. And then Siren Neal is a decent veteran backup who can defend the run. He can defend the pass, both at decent levels when needed to. Not a bad backup. You always, if you're gonna have, especially if you're gonna have a younger safety room or any position, to be honest, it's always good. I think, especially with safeties, to have that veteran backup that isn't going to make a lot of plays, but also isn't going to give up a lot of plays. And I think Siren Neal can potentially be that for this Niners team. But overall, with the San Francisco team, getting Nick Bosa back healthy is obviously going to help. Getting Fred Warner back healthy is obviously going to help. If you can get Dre Greenlaw fully healthy, the acquisition of Osa Adigizua, it can be a good defense. They don't have Robert Sala at DC. While I do think Raheem Morris can be a pretty quality defensive coordinator, maybe not suited for head coach type of responsibilities, but more of a guy you want as your DC. I think they can have a good defense. Now, if they get completely obliterated by injuries, which they might already be on pace to do once again, can they dig out of that hole like last year, where despite all the injuries, Robert Sala was still able to coach a very good defense? I don't know if they can get away with that going into this season, but if they can be healthy, especially their top end talent, because it's not only that they got hurt, their best players got hurt. Their two best players on defense got injured in Nick Bosa and Fred Warner. So if those two can stay healthy and a little bit better overall health, it should be a good defense. They were, I don't know, around like in the late tens of defenses amongst teams last year, like in that 16 to 20 range around there, 18 to 22 range. I think they could be closer to top half of the league, maybe a top 13 to 17 defense if they're relatively healthy. If their stars are fully healthy and the rest of the rest of the defense is relatively healthy, I think they can push that slightly above average defense, which if you combine that with a potential top 10 offense, it's going to be a good team. They're always a good team, if we're being honest. Despite all the injuries that this team constantly gets, unless they get absolutely obliterated with injuries, which they have before, they're going to win most likely 10 plus games, which we'll get into in our schedule record prediction. But first, we got to talk about special teams, of course. Talking quickly about special teams, you have Corliss Waitman, who's a solid punter. Nothing too special, nothing too crazy, just a decent punter, right? You don't necessarily need one of the best punters in the league. You just don't want a bad punter, and they don't have a bad punter. You got Eddie Pinheiro as your kicker, who was one of the more accurate kickers in the league last year, made almost 97% of his field goals. Not the biggest leg in the world, but he did go 6 for 7 from 50 plus. So not a bad kicker at all. He'll miss some kicks. He'll have some frustrating moments, but overall he's a pretty consistent, solid kicker. You got Jacob Cohen as your return man. Not a bad returner. Has some speed to him. Isaac Garendo is pretty similar with Crowing. You got Debo right now as the backup kick returner. Maybe we'll see some Debo in special teams, but overall, it's just a solid special teams unit. Nothing too crazy. You got your quality kicker in Eddie Pinheiro, and outside of that, it's just some decent players. But now we can get to the schedule prediction. And now we can talk about this Niners schedule. I have their floor at 8-9, their ceiling at 13-4, and a final record prediction of 11-6. Now the reason their floor and ceiling is so drastic is because of the injuries. If this team is fully healthy, they have easily the potential to win 12 plus games. They won 12 last year despite the injuries they had. But if the injury trends continue and you see a bunch of players get hurt, they could very well not get double digit wins. So that's why their floor at 8-9 and their ceiling at 13-4. It's a tough schedule, right? Playing the NFC West is never easy. Playing the Rams twice, playing the Seahawks twice. You do get the Cardinals twice, which should be pretty easy wins for them. You play the NFC East, which gives you Dallas, which is a tough game, the Eagles, which is a tough game, but then you got the Giants and Commanders, who are in that not bottom tier of the league, but a little bit above that. You know, so not easy teams. I mean, no team is easy in the NFL, right? But not the most difficult opponents that you'll play, but definitely not bad teams by any means that could be much better than maybe they seem going into the season. You play the AFC West, which obviously gives you the Broncos, which is really tough, the Chiefs, which is really tough, and the Chargers, which is really tough, but also gives you a very winnable game against the Raiders. Then you also play Minnesota, which is kind of similar to that Commanders Giants tier, maybe a little tier above them. You also play the Falcons, which isn't the toughest opponent in the world. So you got some winnable games, but you also got some really tough games. And I have their record at 11-6. They historically have won 10 or more games like every season, like 4 to 5 times in the last like 5, 6 years. They've won double digits. So I don't see why they can't do it again. And I have them at 11-6, one game less than their 12 wins last year, but also above their over under at 9.5. And that'll do it for our Niners preview. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new. It helps the channel out a lot. And if you want to see any of the other team previews we've done, the link to the playlist should be right here or here somewhere. And then also in the description as well. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.